Hey everyone, before we get into the regularly scheduled episode, I wanted to go ahead and make an announcement. I am part of a new podcast called Sunset City. It's a podcast where we are talking about all things Sonic the Hedgehog, past, present, and potentially future, and I am part of this podcast with Channel Pup, Wayne is boss, and of course, Game Apologist. So if you like video game talk, if you like podcasts and long-form content, then maybe go ahead and check us all out at Sunset City, where we will be doing our best to provide you weekly-ish podcasts, depending on everyone's availability. But with all that said, we'll go ahead and get into the regularly scheduled episode, but please check out the YouTube channel for the podcast and also check out the links at that channel where you can get access to the RSS feed on a variety of different podcasting platforms so that you can see the episodes in audio-only form if you happen to be busy and don't have the ability to click on YouTube videos. Anyway, all that said, regular episode. Let's go. So, let's take a quick gander at a story from the Hill, because apparently America just hates trans people. That's what it is right now. Years ago, we hated black people, and that was the big thing, and now most people have understood that maybe being racist is bad, and then it was, just hate the gay people. I mean, they hated them at the same time they hated black people too, but then that started going out of style, and now people are like, you know what? If we can't hate the gay people, and we can't hate the black people, and we've given women the vote, I guess it's time to go ahead and just hate the trans people. And I mean, granted, like with everything else, it's not that America's just suddenly now hating them, it's that now that so much conversation is happening about trans people, politicians are going, now's my time. And it's getting kind of agitating. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at what's going on in Texas. As this song plays in the background, I guess, if you are part of the Sonic fandom, you know that this song is cursed. Absolutely cursed. We're going to drop that down. Whoever's giving me a call, fuck off. I have no idea who you are. Okay, autoplay's bad. But Texas law could remove transgender children from their parents' homes for receiving gender-affirming care. Now, this is not the first, it will not be the last of all these bits of legislation that have been going on lately about trans people, hating trans people, because I'm not going to mince words here. I'm not going to mince words. This is not, oh, they're just concerned about the children. That's what it is. No. We're past that point. We're past the point of thinking that all the conversations about trans people in sports were all hypotheticals, just, oh, we're so worried about women's sports. That thing that we don't talk about ever unless we're trying to bar trans people from participating. Instead of having all of that madness, instead of dealing with all of that, we're just going to accept the fact that these people just hate trans people. And they need to demonstrate that that's not the case. That burden's on them now, because this shit just keeps on happening. So, transgender children in Texas, let's get rid of this autoplay shit. Transgender children in Texas are speaking out for their right to medical care as state lawmakers consider legislation that would make providing gender-affirming care tantamount to child abuse. All right, so let's talk about what transgender care generally happens to kids, okay? Generally, we have therapy, where we let kids engage performatively as the other gender. Again, performatively. We're not going into any surgeries. We're not doing any of that shit. To see if maybe, possibly, they are trans. Maybe their gender does not necessarily conform with what they think, or what their parents think that it should be, or what they were assigned at birth. We have psychological therapy for that to see if gender-affirming care is even necessary. And then, as puberty starts, we have puberty blockers. Something that has very little side effects, and we use to basically buy trans children time, or at least children that might be trans time, to determine whether or not they will actually end up not conforming to their gender when they're older. Because if they aren't, there's no reason to make them go through a puberty that they did not choose, that will have, in many cases, irreversible effects that they cannot manage. Now, you can curb some of the effects of your first puberty when you go through your second puberty on HRT, but it does not wholly undermine what that first puberty does. And there's no reason to force kids to go through that first puberty if it's not one that they want. And we have that therapeutic care in order to make sure that we know whether or not we should do that in the first case. God made me, and God loves me for whom I am, and God does not make mistakes, says Kai Shapley, a 10-year-old transgender girl, during the State Affairs Committee hearing reported by the Texas Tribune. I do not like spending my free time asking adults to make good choices. Now remember, these are adults that will never have to deal with the ramifications of their actions. And here's what I mean. If you are an adult, and you are 40, 50, whatever, and you are a politician, and you are making legislation right now, and you are cis, at the end of the day, everything you do does not affect you. You are making legislation for people who will have to deal with the ramifications of what you do for the rest of their lives, while none of it has to affect you at all. The bill, written by Senator Charles Perry, would add administering or supplying or consenting to assisting in the administering or supplying of gender reassignment surgery or puberty blockers for the purposes of gender transitioning or gender reassignment to the list of punishable offenses under the state's child protection laws. Again, even though the puberty blockers are generally the only thing that happens, that is the thing they are aiming at. Parents, as well as medical providers who provide gender-affirming care to transgender children, would also lose custody of their children and face criminal charges. Medical professionals and the LGBTQ+ community, including transgender advocates, argue that if transgender children do not receive gender-affirming care, they are at higher risk for mental health conditions and even suicides. Studies show that access to puberty blockers can decrease the chance of suicide in transgender teens who are already at higher risk for suicide than their cisgender peers. And of course, there is another article going into all of this as well, because The Hill has gone into this stuff before. Stop asking me about your ads right now. Affirming healthcare can literally be life or death for anyone, but particularly for trans youth, as Raquel Williams, a black activist and writer, told CNN. People think that it's an exaggeration. It's not. People think that you can just discipline identity out of someone, and that it's not true, and in many ways, it's torture to do so. So let's go ahead and contextualize this. What does this mean? There are parents who, let's say that they've been raising little Timmy, and little Timmy says, hey, I think, what would you have called me if my... Let me point out that I'm actually arguing from experience. Not my personal experience, but the experience of somebody I grew up with. They asked their parents, hey, like they were born female, and said, hey, what would my name be if I was born a guy? What would my name have been? And upon giving them the name that they would have been if they were born a person, they started experimenting and trying to have people call them that name, and found that that name was much more comfortable. And later on, as an adult, ended up just coming out straight up as trans. This is what they were. But they still had to undergo everything, not only going through puberty as their assigned gender, which was not the gender they actually conformed to, but also had to deal with other issues later on down the road, or just in school. People ostracizing them, basically making them an enemy. And granted, there's a lot of detail in that story that I'm leaving out on purpose, because this is an individual that I do not want to talk about without their consent, so I'm being as vague as possible. But the point is that this is a real thing that happens. If it happens to one person, it's probably happened to 100 or 1,000 or any number. There's any number of kids who grow up and ask their parent, hey, what would my name have been if I had been this? And then they start trying to operate as that, and then realize this is much more comfortable, this is much more happy, I feel much more like myself, I feel more comfortable in my skin. And then if they start performing that way, everybody starts trying to make them conform to how they see them. And when they do that, when they start trying to make the individual conform to how they see them, well, they're no longer operating as themselves anymore. And even if you're not trans in the chat, how many times have you been told that what you're going through is a phase, and yet it ended up being something that you engaged in for 10, 20, 30 years of your life. How many people in the chat or in the comment section of this video afterwards, if you're watching, please subscribe now, please hit all those buttons, please comment, let me know what you think, let me know what your answer to this is. How many of you have been told that some part that you consider now integral to your identity as a person, you were told was something passing? It could be your gender, it could be your sexuality, it could be a fixation on a particular thing, it could be a career choice, any of these things. How many of you were told this is a phase, you'll get over it, and everybody started asking you to operate as if it were a phase? And then lo and behold, 10, 20, 30 years later, you're still fucking doing it. It's just now you don't have to worry about the parents and the people from before, so you're doing it more comfortably. I know for me, it was that way, as small of a thing as it is, it was that way with me for gaming. Being told, oh, you're not going to be able to turn gaming into a job. Well, now it's part of my job. It's one of the things I do to pay my bills. So for all of you people who said that one day you're going to have to grow up, fuck you, games are not tied to our ages. But that's a small thing, and it can be a small thing. My point is, I want you to take that small thing, now magnify it, and now we're talking about trans people. Now we're talking about the individual lived experiences of a trans person. Take that small identifying thing, that fixation, that hobby, that anything, multiply it higher for sexuality and higher for being trans, because these are things that are integral to a person's identity. To tell a kid for the entirety of their time that they are growing that that is how things work, that you know more about their brain than they do, these things are damaging, especially when that person becomes an adult and has to determine whether or not they want to maintain a relationship with you with all the baggage of everything you did to them while they were growing up. Not to mention the issues with living in a state like Texas, dealing with them trying to strip away your rights. And then you having, just think about this. Imagine all this passes. How many kids do you think are going to grow up spiteful and hop into politics for the sole purpose of fighting back against this shit? How many do you think are going to end up being violent? I'd say it doesn't matter in either case. The either case is that you are creating a lot of problems when you engage in stuff like this. Not only are you engaging in needless mental suffering, but now we're going to have people who are going to have to spend their time cutting through the bureaucracy of the bullshit that you signed up in red tape. It says in here, the bill is just one of 4 pieces of anti-transgender legislation that state lawmakers are considering this week, and 6 that have been introduced this year, including several banning transgender athletes from participating in sports and others restricting transgender patients across healthcare. This push is part of a nationwide effort to restrict the rights of transgender Americans that has sparked backlash from the LGBTQ community and their allies. Now, what does it mean when it says a nationwide effort to restrict the rights of transgender Americans? Well, we're going to get into that, because that's the second part of this topic. Legislative Tracker. This was sent to me by MUI Pikachu. So everybody in the chat, please give a thank you to it, Pikachu, and everybody who is watching in the comment section, please go ahead and drop a thing as well here. But let's go ahead and see here. Legislative Tracker. During the 2021 legislative session, dozens of states will consider legislation related to LGBTQ discrimination. Some bills will seek to advance the comprehensive non-discrimination laws that LGBTQ people sorely need, while others will almost certainly attempt to single out and target LGBTQ people for unfair and unequal treatment. Freedom for All Americans is tracking each relevant bill in our 2001 legislative tracker in partnership with the Equality Federation. So, it's bad in Texas. There are 12 bills in Texas right now. 3 bills in Louisiana, 4 bills in Georgia, 3 bills in Florida, 3 bills Alabama, 2 bills Mississippi. It is faster and easier to name the states that it's not happening in. We don't have a problem wow, my brain just completely screwed up on Alaska. It just tried to say Arkansas. We have these issues in Arkansas. We don't have them in Alaska. We don't have them in California. We don't have them in Colorado. We don't have them in Washington. We don't have them in New York. But we have them in multiple other states. More than half of the states in the United States right now have multiple bills currently dealing with trans youth. And these are bills trying to take away legislation. Anti-transgender legislation, over 100 bills, and over half the states have this. Now, why do we have this sudden uptick? Why is this a thing? I already donate to you. Leave me alone, Human Rights Campaign. You already get my money. 2021 becomes the record year for anti-transgender legislation. Legislation filed this week marks the 80th, 81st, and 82nd anti-transgender bill introduced in 2021, surpassing the total of 79 in all of 2020, making it the highest number of anti-transgender bills in history. These bills are not addressing any real problems. They are not being requested by constituents. Rather, they are being driven by national far-right organizations attempting to score political points by sowing fear and hate. The entire article is here to read if you would like to, but the fact of the matter is this is the highest amount we have. There's a couple reasons for this, and a lot of this is going to be speculation on my part, but a lot of it I think is actually very on the nose here. So, why is this happening? Well, first of all, because conservatives have lost practically every other argument. They lost the argument about gay rights. They lost the argument about black voters. They lost the argument about women having the vote. They lost the argument about creationism being taught in schools, except in Arkansas, where apparently that's getting pushed through again. I need to do some research on that. Anyway, point being, they've lost the argument politically and socially and legislatively for so long on so many things. This seems to be the thing that they think they can win on. And they're not entirely wrong. Strategically, conservatives are actually doing the right thing right now to win, because there are people who are Democrats who, merely by not understanding trans issues, merely by not having friends who are trans, merely by not being exposed to these ideas and the medical texts that go along with them, showing that we have not the best, but certainly a fairly robust idea of how trans people should be treated medically. Without easy access to that by most people, at least them knowing they have easy access to it, there are plenty of people, at least within the Democratic Party, who are willing to side with Republicans on these issues because they are just as susceptible to the rhetoric of saving children, asterisk, as anyone else. Many of these bills are written in such a way that they target only transgender women or only transgender kids, because those are the people that they find that are most vulnerable and easy to hit. The children can't generally speak for themselves, and when they do, we can dismiss them based on the idea that they're children, and we shouldn't take what they say seriously. And when it comes to transgender women, while there are plenty of transgender women who look perfectly fine, there are plenty as well that conservatives can point to and say, do you want that person in your bathroom with your female child? They have scapegoats, plenty of them, and it's insulting and it's degrading, but strategically, it is an angle that they can utilize. And it is an angle that they are largely bringing people over through. Consider Richard Dawkins. Richard Dawkins, lately, and even David Silverman to another extent, have both been people who the atheist community, a community that I am invested in and a part of, have held in high regard at various points in time. But now, both of them are jumping on the anti-trans train. If you don't believe me, go ahead. Take a look at Twitter. Just take a look at Richard Dawkins' Twitter for a half a second. Hell, we could even do it right now. Just give me a second. Come on, Richard. Let's take a look Let's take a look. Why am I not finding it? There we go. Here we are. The endorsement of my book is very exciting for me. I've been reading Richard Dawkins since The Selfish Gene. He's a hero of mine. The emphasis of freedom and belief, blah, 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 blah. So, trans, when ideology meets reality. Let's take a look at the comments here of this book endorsed by Richard Dawkins. He's a genius biologist and a science popularizer, but his social commentary makes me wonder if his 14-year-old was left in charge of Twitter. Oh, he said it's brave. Makes me imagine him like, guys, is that spooky issue I'm scared to even mention. And she's written a whole book about it. Helen is so brave. So, there's another post, and I don't have it on here on the immediate. Let's just hop on here and see if it's here. Because, like, where it comes to biology, generally he's great. But when it comes to social issues, not so great. Also, here he is posting stuff about Elon Musk. Let's just not. Why am I not finding it? His post, like, blew up recently. Huh. Maybe I skimmed past it? Could be the case. Anyway, we are spending too much time here. Point is, there have been issues with him and trans shit so far. You know what? Actually, we can go... We can do that. We can just do this one here. Boom! There we go. Found it. In 2015, Rachel Dolezal, a white chapter president of the NAACP, was vilified for identifying as black. Some men choose to identify as women, and some women choose to identify as men. You will be vilified if you deny that they are literally what they identify as. Discuss. Now, what happens when he posts something like this on Twitter? Can everybody agree real quick that Twitter's a toxic cesspool and meaningful conversation on Twitter is rare, if not impossible? Meaningful conversation can happen on it, but it's generally very rare. Apparently, Dawkins doesn't realize this, which, again, Twitter is kind of after his time, but he's been using it for long enough, so I would hope he knows about this. But when he says that I do not intend to disparage trans people, but I see that my academic discuss question has been misconstrued as such, and I deplore this. It was also not my intent to ally with any of the Republican bigots in the U.S. now exploiting this issue. So, Dawkins, here's the thing. People's identity is not something that's generally up for discussion, because usually the people that end up discussing that identity are not the people who identify at all. Usually when we have these discussions, it's usually mostly cis people having these discussions. Or we have people who just want other people to have these discussions like you, but again, you maybe need to read the room and understand that when you post stuff like this, even though it seems very innocuous on its own, based on where you've posted this and based on what's going on in the United States right now, regardless of your intent, the end result is that this is going to get hijacked by those Republicans, because as I said before, this is the area that they think they can win. Either you've got the David Silvermans of the world who are going to actively jump on this, or you've got the Richard Dawkins of this world who are going to be unwittingly duped into this, or jump on it depending on the thread. In either case, maybe read the room, and instead of saying, let's discuss these things, maybe go, hey, people have been discussing this stuff for years in an academic setting. Instead of saying, let's discuss this on Twitter, maybe, just maybe, we could instead start fighting for people's rights and start focusing on that instead of constantly stepping into these traps. Maybe, just maybe. I know the easiest way not to step into social traps on Twitter is to generally just don't fucking post. But point is, Texas is one in many of these instances of trans issues being heavily politicized. And again, 2021, just in the first few months, we're on month 4. And 2021 already has the most anti-trans legislation of any year. That's madness. That's crazy. That is absolutely bonkers. But that's how it is. That's how it is. But with that said, what do you guys think? Let me know in the comment section below. Let me know in the chat. Hit the like button if you haven't already. Hit subscribe if you haven't already. And oh, by the way, if you haven't, please go ahead and head to, and it's going to be linked in the video, go ahead and head to the Sunset City YouTube channel and check out the podcast that I am working on with Game Apologist, Channel Bup, and Wayne is Boss. Please, thank you, and as always, everyone, insert into video tagline here.